I was actually waiting until V3 before sharing my full thoughts on the new Elation Silverwolf, since major changes usually stop happening after that point. And I have to be honest with you, I was really disappointed with her in V1 and V2. Her kit felt very restrictive, and honestly, you could even argue that Eva was performing better than her at that stage. Oh, and just to clarify, in this video, I'll be focusing only on Silverwolf, since she's clearly the main highlight of this anniversary. I do plan to talk about Elation MC and possibly Eva in separate videos, because each of them deserves their own proper discussion. I don't want to cram everything into one video and make it too dense. At the end of the day, I want to keep things as clear and easy to follow as possible, so the main points come across effectively. So with all that said, let's start breaking down Elation Silverwolf, beginning with her limitations back in V1. Before we get into the details, there's one important thing I want to point out, something many of you might overlook. Most of the V3 gameplay videos you see on YouTube or other platforms are played with Elation shills enabled, and this is very important to understand, because with Elation shills, the overall effectiveness of a Silverwolf Elation team can increase significantly, I'd say by at least 50% or more. This especially affects punchline generation and how frequently you can trigger AHA impact. So for the sake of this analysis, I will not assume the presence of Elation shills. Why? Because with faster punchline generation, Silverwolf's ultimate becomes much easier to activate, and that creates an unfair comparison when you're evaluating her performance against other top DPS units. So moving forward, everything I discuss in this video will be based on a no-shill scenario, to keep things as fair and realistic as possible. Alright, so let's start from the beginning, specifically Silverwolf V1 and V2, since V2 didn't really change much compared to her initial version. The main issue starts with her scaling. In V1, Silverwolf scaled off attack, and she still relied on that hidden NMR mechanic to gain access to her ultimate. Now, her ultimate works somewhat similarly to Firefly. You activate it, Silverwolf gets a 100% advance forward, and then when her turn comes, she performs that boom boom special attack. But here's the problem. That attack does not end her ultimate state. She remains in that state, and in order to attack again, she needs to take another turn. And this is where everything starts falling apart. Because she scales with attack, you're forced into an awkward decision. You either build base speed for maximum damage, or you push towards something like 134 speed to get more turns. But going for 134 speed already hurts her damage output, so naturally, the better option at the time was to stay at base speed. And that creates another issue. At base speed, Silverwolf can realistically only attack once per cycle. If you try to force a second action by increasing speed, you lose damage. If you don't, you're stuck with just one attack. Either way, you're losing. So, in practice, her number of actions is basically hard-capped, and that's a huge problem, especially in a meta where more actions directly translate to more damage. With how fast the game is evolving, a limitation like this would get her power crept very quickly. It even reached a point where characters like Evanesca were simply outperforming her because they didn't have these restrictions. I've seen showcases where Silverwolf, even in a premium E2 S1 setup with Elation shills, couldn't zero-cycle anomaly arbitration. And honestly, that's pretty insane. So the core problem was very clear. It came down to her scaling and how her ultimate mechanics limited her actions. And because of that, I held off on making a final judgment. I wanted to see what changes would come in V3. Because honestly, if nothing changed, I would have completely written her off. So we've talked about Silverwolf V1 and everything it lacked. Then V3 comes in and seemingly fixes those issues. Or does it? So what exactly did V3 change? Let's break it down into the three most important updates Hoyoverse made to Silverwolf. First, they lowered the hidden MMR requirement. The cost to enter her ultimate was reduced from 80 to 60. This is a very solid change, because faster access to her ultimate naturally leads to faster rotations and more consistent output. Second, they introduced a new mechanic where hidden MMR contributes directly to her critical stats. Specifically, each point gives 0.3% crit rate, and more importantly, if Silverwolf exceeds 100% crit rate, any excess is converted into crit damage at a rate of 0.6% per point. This is actually a huge deal. It significantly lowers the difficulty of building her, since you no longer need to heavily invest in both crit rate and crit damage separately. The system essentially helps balance her stats automatically. At first, I questioned why Hoyoverse would even add something like this. It didn't really make sense, until I realized they made a much bigger change to her core design. And that brings us to the third and most important change. Hoyoverse shifted her scaling from attack to speed. This is reflected in two major ways. First, her trace now rewards speed heavily. If her speed exceeds 150, she gains 30% elation, and for every additional point of speed beyond that, she gains 2% more elation, up to a cap of 100 excess speed. That means at around 250 speed, she can reach a massive 230% elation bonus. Second, this design shift is also reflected in her light cone. Previously, it focused on attack and general damage buffs. Now, it provides a speed boost of 18%, clearly pushing her toward a speed scaling playstyle. I'll go into more detail about her light cone later, but even from this alone, it's obvious that Hoyoverse wants to make it easier for her to reach those high speed thresholds. So the big question is, why is this change so important in the bigger picture? Before we dive deeper into why speed is so important, let's quickly refresh our understanding of speed breakpoints. And just to be clear, everything I'm about to say is based on a zero-cycle scenario, so keep that context in mind. Speed directly determines how many turns your character can take in a single cycle. At a base level, with around 100 speed, you get 1 turn per cycle. At 134 speed, you reach the next breakpoint and get 2 turns per cycle. And at 200 speed, you hit the next major breakpoint, allowing 3 turns per cycle. So, you can probably already see where this is going. With all the changes in V3, it's very clear that Hoyoverse intends for Silverwolf to be built at 200 speed or higher. More speed means more turns, and more turns mean more damage, especially when her kit now directly scales with speed through elation bonuses. And don't forget, this ties directly into her hidden MMR mechanics, which convert into crit rate and crit damage. Everything in her kit is now interconnected around speed scaling. There's another key detail here. After using her enhanced attack 3 times in her ultimate state, Silverwolf exits that state. And guess what lines up perfectly with that? 200 speed. At this breakpoint, she can naturally fit those 3 actions within a single cycle. This strongly suggests that her design is built around delivering 3 powerful actions per cycle, ideally enough to eliminate enemies within that window, especially in content like Memory of Chaos. Because of this, I personally believe that any showcase using Silverwolf at below 200 speed isn't really representative of her intended performance. At least based on what we see in V3, 200 speed is not optional. It's the baseline. Alright, enough about the fixes. Let's talk about what Hoyoverse didn't fix in V3. The shift to speed scaling is definitely the right direction for Silverwolf, no doubt about that. But there's still a big, glaring problem. And I'm not exaggerating. Even at 200 speed, Silverwolf is essentially locked into only 3 attacks per cycle during her ultimate. In some situations, if the enemy is tanky enough, you might squeeze in 2 ultimates per cycle, which translates to roughly 5 attacks total. Usually 1 ultimate for the first wave and 1 for the boss. On paper, that sounds fine, but in practice, it's still very limiting. Yes, her Eidolon 2 helps. In the best case scenario, it can add 2 extra attacks during her ultimate, bringing her total up to around 5 attacks per ultimate. But that's exactly the problem. You need E2 just to reach 5 attacks, and even then, the total output is only comparable to something like a single Phanon Meteor. And don't forget, a lot of the showcase damage you see is boosted by elation shills. Once you remove those, her performance in a true zero-cycle scenario becomes noticeably weaker. Even with faster punchline generation and faster hidden MMR gain, it doesn't fully solve the issue. Why? Because Silverwolf cannot exit her ultimate state early. Compare that to someone like Castoris. With Castoris, you have flexibility. You can either stay in her ultimate state or exit early after dealing burst damage, allowing her to cycle back into her ultimate much faster thanks to her energy generation mechanics. Silverwolf doesn't have that option. She is locked into 3 enhanced attacks before exiting her ultimate, and that restriction heavily limits her overall potential. And honestly, it's disappointing that this issue still wasn't addressed in V3. When you look at it, Castoris can run at something like 90 speed and still trigger her ultimate more frequently than Silverwolf in practice. Yes, Silverwolf may hit harder per attack, but that gap can easily be closed with better supports or buffers. And when that happens, the limitation in her action count becomes even more obvious. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure which direction Hoyoverse wants to take with Silverwolf. So from this point on, this is just my personal take on how her kit could be improved. The simplest fix, in my opinion, would be to make her ultimate work more like Castoris's. In other words, she deals her damage once, then immediately exits her ultimate state. That's it. With this approach, you could build teams focused on generating hidden MMR and punchline as quickly as possible, allowing Silverwolf to cycle her ultimate repeatedly. And in the future, if we get better hidden MMR generators, this would naturally scale her performance even higher without making the gameplay overly complicated. It's simple, effective, and easy to balance. That said, I don't think Hoyoverse will go in this direction. It wouldn't make much sense to design a high-speed scaling unit only to have her repeatedly enter and exit her ultimate like that. So here's a second idea. Instead of changing how her ultimate works fundamentally, they could allow Silverwolf to take more actions during her ultimate state. For example, she could gain extra speed, similar to Firefly, or even receive additional turns, like Phanon. Both approaches serve the same purpose, allowing her to perform more attacks during her ultimate window. And if you look at characters like Phanon, especially at E2, he can easily reach 8 or more actions in a cycle, and in some cases even exceed 12 total attacks when everything lines up. Yes, not all of those are his strongest attacks, but the point still stands. Silverwolf, especially at E2, should at least approach that level of action frequency during her ultimate. Not necessarily to the same extreme, but enough to remove the feeling that she's being heavily limited. This kind of adjustment wouldn't make her overpowered, especially compared to something like a full mono remembrance team, but it would make her feel much more complete. At the end of the day, those are the two main directions I can think of right now, based on her current design. And to be fair, I'm actually very happy with the rest of her scaling. The fact that she scales with elation, speed, and crit damage gives her extremely high potential compared to most DPS units. She has the foundation to be great. She just needs that final piece to truly bring everything together. Well, I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to say about Silverwolf V3. Overall, it's definitely a step in the right direction. She feels much better now, but she's still missing a few key pieces. With some minor adjustments, and more importantly, the right support, she could easily become one of the strongest units in the game. And when I say the right support, I mean something like what Hyacine was to Castoris. If Silverwolf gets that kind of dedicated support in the future, I honestly believe she could even surpass something like a mono remembrance team. And yes, I'm going to say it. I think there's a high chance that Sparksy will eventually be replaced by a better support for Silverwolf. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I just don't see it any other way. If you look at past patterns, the true premium teams always come after the main DPS is released. Take Castoris, for example. Her full premium team came later with units like Evernight, Hyacine, and Cyrene. Not convinced? Look at Phanon. His premium team also came afterward, with Danhung PT, Ceridra, and Cyrene. So, based on that pattern, it's very likely that Silverwolf's best team hasn't even been fully released yet. Sure, you could argue that Hoyoverse might change their release strategy this time, but based on past trends, I find that unlikely. It could happen, but the chances are pretty small. And from a business perspective, it also makes sense for them to release supporting units later to keep the hype going. So yeah, that's where I stand for now. So that's everything for today's video. Now I want to hear from you. Is Silverwolf V3 actually fixed? Or is she still a problem waiting to happen? Do you think she's already strong enough? Or does she still need more buffs to truly compete? Or maybe you think I'm completely wrong? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading everything. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye!